Hello again, gamers and gamettes, and welcome to a very special episode of NotSoHardcoreGaming. I'm your host, Jeremy, and why is today special? As I'm sure you've read. As of posting this, it will be exactly 1 year since I posted the very first episode of NotSoHardcoreGaming. Now before I actually get into what today's episode is, like what I'm doing for today's episode, I have a few things to say. When I started this series, I remember I was so nervous for the first episode. You know, if you go back and listen to it, first of all, the audio quality is not nearly as good as it is now. Over this last year, I picked up, editing, converting. So I used to be posting it in WAV files. Now MP3 just for better quality. I've picked up a few little tricks, but as well as that, you'll notice my voice was pretty shaky back then. And when I was first recording that episode, I was sitting there, I was like, okay, I can do this. No, I can't do this. And it took me, that episode was like 7 minutes, and it took me longer than 7 minutes just to work up the courage to record it. And oddly enough, recording it was a difficult bit. Once it was recorded, I posted it without a second thought, So that was interesting at the time, but I was just so nervous starting off. And, since then, I started the Instagram page where I would post screenshots of games that I was playing at the time, so people knew what I'd be talking about in future, as well as after a while, I started posting gym content, so I started posting my face, which was a big step in its own, but, I was posting videos of what I was doing in the gym, which, it did wonders for my confidence at the time, and, I never would have thought about that. I never in my life would have thought I could do that, but then, after a while, I took a big dive and I thought, I gotta do something big. So I ended up posting without a shirt, which was just, for me, it was like proving to myself I could do it. Just put myself way outside my comfort zone. And it's sort of like, that's now a thing I do regularly. I put myself outside my comfort zone. I try new things. Basically, I've started to live that way, doing new things, and I think all of it started from when I began this series, So, I had to get a little bit sentimental for that, and these last 2 months have been particularly good because I'm now looking at moving on my own, which, again, 6 months ago, I never would have thought about this, But now, I'm actually looking to move out, where I've only recently turned 20, so that's a pretty big step in anyone's life, but for me, that was a gigantic leap. But as well as that, I just recently got a job. In fact, just earlier today, as of recording this, I had my first ever shift. So that was such a monumentous moment, and I think all of this really started from when I started the podcast, because that gave me the voice that I needed. That allowed me to find a voice I had never had before. And if you were to trace it back further, it started probably 6 months before I started the podcast, but everything seemed to change about a year ago. So I had to share some news for that. And without further ado, we will get into what today's episode is about. So, I wanted to make a special episode, and I had to think, okay, what do I make this episode for? I wanted to have one where I could recap a lot of my views on the games that I've spoken about, and originally I was thinking, I'll do a ranking list, but then I was thinking about it and I thought, do you know how difficult it's going to be to rank 40 games in best to worst, let alone when you have games that are so different but so good, it would be impossible. So we decided on a tier list. You know, if you want to see a visual of it, check out my Facebook page, NotSoHardcoreGaming. I have a full list made up, and that will tell you everything, but let's get into it. And I'm going to start in order for every episode that I recorded, and I'll say where it is and why. So let's get started. The first ever game I spoke about was Middle-earth: Shadow of War. Now, to just fully begin this, I should give a brief demonstration of all the tiers for this. So, up top, best games is S tier. These are godly games, you know, made for the gods themselves. Next up is A tier, which is demigods, you know. We wanted to have something, a good catchy name for the tiers. Up next was B tier, which is magical mortal. Now, these ideas, I will admit, Blaze had a hand in this, so he's the creative mind behind these names for the tiers. The fourth tier, the fourth best, is C tier, mere mortal. D tier, these are pretty weak. These are the, oh, we're getting a bit dicey. And E tier, these are the games that just, nah, you know? So those are the tiers, but Shadow of War is an A tier game. Now, first of all, it will hold a special place because it's the first game I ever spoke about, you know? This is what started it all. And I did genuinely enjoy this game. I found it was a brilliant mix of stealth and all-out combat. I loved the way the skills were, like they were designed. There was a lot to love for this game, and it will still be one of the best games I've ever played. So, honestly, it was a little bit tough between S tier and A tier, but what I found really took away from it sometimes is it can really slow it down because this game had a tendency for the orcs, the enemies that you're facing, who just monologue. And you look at it and you think, shut the hell up and get to fighting, because it takes so long. And if you die, one thing that was good about if you die and you came back, they remembered it, but it led to longer monologues, which means if you came across a particularly difficult enemy and you died to them even 2 times, you have 3 really long lines from them. It just took away from it, and I think that's dropped it into A tier. So a very good game, but just not quite there, you know? Next up, we had God of War 4. This is special for one other reason. It's the very first episode that Blaze was ever on. He's a good friend of the channel. We all know who Blaze is. Great guy. Very good with video games and recommendations and games themselves. Always loved having him on. And, you know, this was the first one. This was where it all started. This game, for me, was an easy S tier. This is one of the best games I have ever played. I got this very early on when I got my first PlayStation 4. You know, the previous console I had before that was an Xbox 360. So the time I got this, it was technically current gen. Technically. Was just before the PS5 came out. But this was the first game I played on it. And the combat for God of War 4 was great. But then I found I would go back and I'd find new combos which evolved it massively. And then when you learn more about the runic attacks, the combat is so much more complex and beautiful when you know what you're doing that I found myself coming back to this. It was beautiful to look at the whole way through. And I enjoyed the story very much. So I love pretty much everything about this game. Only thing I ever had that went against it was Atreus being an annoying little bastard. But I could never put it in anything else except S tier. A brilliant, brilliant game for me. Episode 3 was Subnautica. Oh boy, Subnautica. This is a game which, honestly, I didn't know about it until a few probably a couple of years after it came out originally. But I first discovered it through Jacksepticeye, who is one of my favorite YouTubers of all time. I really love his work, and he was actually probably part of the reason I thought to myself, I can do this type of thing, you know? He was one of the reasons that I thought to myself, I can start this, and hopefully I can do streaming and Let's Plays someday, you know? So I found it through him, and I knew about it for a couple of years before I got my first chance to play it. So I still had that nostalgia for it, and what I found incredible for it was it felt exactly the same when you're playing it. Even though you know what the ending is, you've seen the creatures before, it doesn't hit any less when you first see them and when you first experience the ending. So, easy S tier. Easy as anything. Just a beautiful game for the nostalgia, beautiful to look at, great gameplay. It's an idea I hadn't seen before, and just so well done. S tier all the way. This game is Bloodborne. Oh boy! This game, I remember, and I probably said this in the original, that recommended by Blaze once again. And when I tried this originally, I tried it for a little bit and I thought, screw this. No, I did not like it. The combat was difficulty unlike anything I had experienced before. And I just thought to myself, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to enjoy it. But then he brought up a good point, dear old Blaze. He brought up a point. You're doing a gaming podcast. You have to talk about this type of thing eventually, you know? And I thought, well, that's a damn good point. And then part of my determination came out. I thought, okay, I'm going to finish this game and I'm going to talk about it. And it was the 3rd episode of it. And this game is unlike any other game I've seen. Simply, well, it may be similar to like Dark Souls series, but this was before I even knew, had played Dark Souls. It was my first introduction into difficulty games. Games that are designed to be difficult. The art style for it was very Victorian era. There was a lot of, it was a grisly game to look at. There was a lot of just terrifying looking creatures, as well as the weapons. They were good looking, everything about it. This had to be S tier because when I originally found it, I didn't really want to continue it. But as soon as I started and as soon as I got past the first boss, it hooked me in. Once I really got into it and I really gave it that chance, there was no way I was going to stop before I saw everything there is to see. And it came to the point I platinumed Bloodborne, which was a very difficult thing to do, but such a satisfying thing. In case you haven't guessed, another S tier game. So the first 3 of the first 4 games have been S tier, but these are some of the best games I've played, so I cannot place them anywhere else. Next up was Halo 4. Now, this was one of the very first shooter games I had ever played, and I believe it was the first game I bought when I got my Xbox 360 back in the day. This was some time ago that I got that old thing, and I spent a lot of time on this game. I spent a lot of time, and I played it each difficulty twice throughout the time I've had it for full completion. I counted every death I had for it in the original, so I was real into this. Looking back, there were some things about it I'd change. They're a little bit, and it was a bit more difficult to decide, but in the end, I was choosing between A and B tier, and I placed it in the B tier. It's, looking back on it, there were some things that I realized got to me. If you died multiple times, the way the checkpoints were set up, you would hear the same dialogue At one point I was stuck and I died about 100 times in the same stage, so I heard the same dialogue again, and that to me was what brought it down. But Halo 4 is in the B tier. Definitely a solid game, but definitely not one of the best I've ever played. It has a place in my heart, but it just ain't it, you know? Next on the list was Titanfall 2. Now this was a little bit different for it. Before I talk too much, I actually ended up making 2 episodes on this game. I originally spoke about it very early on in the podcast, and then I had a good friend of mine come on for an episode where we decided to talk about Titanfall 2, just to make it a bit more comfortable for him, as it was a game he had really enjoyed. And, you know, I wanted to have him on the podcast. He's a good friend. He has a disability like myself, so I wanted to give him the chance to have his voice out there, give him a chance to give his opinion. So as I said, we made 2 episodes on it all together. The game itself, it's a shooter game, you know, and I did like the combination of the 2 different combat styles of, you know, on your own, you use assault rifles, pistols, whatever else, as well as having the combat inside of the Titan, where there's a lot more destruction. You know, there's a little part of me that loves destruction, loves blowing things up, so it triggered quite well for me. And I had always quite enjoyed the rapport between, you know, the robotic voice, I guess he doesn't get sarcasm, he doesn't get humor, that sort of thing. I always loved that dynamic. And the game, I ended up having to put it in a B tier for one reason alone, and that's it didn't feel long enough for me. By the end of it, I realized it just felt so short, and I wanted to see so much more from it. I wanted to see a longer story. I can understand it's not as simple as that. I do get that, but I realized after I played it the second time, because I had been more experienced with it, I was able to complete it in a shorter amount of time because there was less dying. And that was when I realized it felt very short. And it's a shame. It doesn't take away from the gameplay at all, but it would have been easy A tier if there was just a bit more to experience. And maybe if I'd been able to play more multiplayer, it could have been different, but because I've only been able to play single player, it was a B tier. Next up, Far Cry 3. Far Cry series has been around for quite a long time, and Far Cry 3 was my very first encounter with it. The originals were long before I was able to get my own Xbox, my own chance to play it. The game, it's, again, guns, combat, which is original. I never thought I'd be into gun games before I started playing them, but once I did, I started to enjoy them quite a lot. This game, I enjoyed the combat greatly. It looked pretty damn good for, at the time, you know, what you would expect of an Xbox 360 game. And the story is, well, it's a little bit of a mess, admittedly, but I did enjoy it. The only thing is, I had to put this at a B tier for one big reason. Vaz, who is hyped up, he's on the main cover, and he is hyped up as a really big enemy. You know, he's vicious, he's clearly beyond psycho. The energy he brings into it, the actor, when the actor went in, and an interesting fact I found, they didn't have a character written for Vaz, you know, but the way he portrayed it, the energy he gave impressed them so much, they created a character for him, you know, which is impressive, and I find that such a cool fact. But what brought it down for me was he seemed to die so early on. I wanted him to be the big bad guy. The one that you end the game by defeating. And it just, the way he died as well, he died so quickly, it seemed. Once you meet him, there's barely any combat with it. It's just, You finally are with him face to face, and he's dead. I didn't like the way it ended, so it had to be a B tier because he was too hyped up for too much of a disappointing end. Need for Speed Payback is next. A car game is a car game. You know, I enjoy car games quite a lot, and this it was a good looking game. I loved the feel of it. I always had a great time, you know, navigating around the nitrous for the game. That always felt good. The sudden speed boost and learning to control it separately. That was a good experience, and I did greatly enjoy this. But there were a few things that just didn't feel right for me. One big problem I had with it was that sometimes the way it would make it difficult was by, for example, when you're being chased by cops, is you'd be going really fast, you're finally outrunning the others, and then it spawns a police car in front of you. When you're going at 240 kilometers or whatever, really, really fast speeds, and you have one suddenly spawn in, you see it materialize in front of you, how in the hell are you supposed to avoid it? And I had so many times that I'll be going and then suddenly there's one there and it destroys you. And I hate when it has fake difficulty. You know, you could make it more difficult by when you like making the cop cars a bit faster so they keep up with you a bit better, or something like that. But what it ends up doing is spawning them too close to you, and they seem to be able to knock you off the road far easier. You try and knock them off, it doesn't have nearly as much effect as them knocking you off the road. You know? It just didn't feel as good there because it was fake difficulty. And that fact put it in C tier for me. Sorry, B tier. B tier, like middle tier. Everything else sort of did make up for it, but if they just made it difficult the right way, it would have been so much better for it. It wouldn't have been as frustrating, and it just would have felt nicer. Because nobody likes to feel cheated, and I got that so much. Moving on to our next game, which was episode 10, Prototype 2. A game which I had heard of. I had heard of this game, and that was about it. And dear old friend Blaze, he recommended it to me because he had played it when he was a lot younger and had very much enjoyed the combat for it, so I thought, it sounds interesting. I love the idea of basically your character evolving, you know, to have better powers, stronger powers, different attacks. I loved the premise of it. And playing it, the visuals were, you know, about as good as you can expect from the time. I would love to see this game like completely remastered, built from the ground up, but all over again. You know, the same story, that sort of thing, just see it like in today's visuals. That would be awesome to see, but has not yet to be. The game itself, the combat was awesome. Very different to other games that I've played, because it's not R2 there, or LTRT, in that it's not the same layout as other ones. It's a very different style of gameplay, which I very much enjoyed. And I feel like it did things very, very well. So it had to be A tier. Not quite an S tier, because part of me, I can't completely forget just how different it is. Because it's older visuals, it's difficult to disregard that, if that makes sense. Looking at it, you know, comparing it, I try not to, but it's difficult sometimes. If it were today's visuals like the others, then it would definitely be S tier, but I had to put it A tier. Nearly perfect, just not quite there. Up next, the great Skyrim. probably one of the very best known games of all time. So many memes about it. So many people playing it, everything. It's one I knew of for quite some time. And playing it, I did very much enjoy it. The shouts, I quite enjoyed the combat for it, and all the different armor, all the different swords, weapons, everything. There was a wide range. But I couldn't place it as high as I think a lot of people would want, I had to put it at a B tier. Because when it was re-released, it didn't really have much changed. It felt like I was playing the same old Skyrim I'd played previously. So when something is re-released, you expect more of a difference, and there wasn't enough of a difference for me. And then the only thing, when you compare it to now, on the PlayStation 4, on the newer consoles, you can add fan-made mods. So when you look at the original, it can't stack up because, you can't get the same level of beauty as I've been able to get through mods because it was almost unattainable. I apologize for my phone going off there. Thought I had muted that. I had not. It's just not quite the same without mods now. So when I look at the game originally, it can't stack up. That's why it had to be a B tier for me, because the fact that it was re-released without enough of a difference for me let me down a little bit, and there is no way in hell you can compare it to with mods, just because of the versatility of it. And in terms of other than that, though, I greatly commend the allowing of mods. It is very rare to find games that the game developers themselves not only allow but encourage mods. So that is one thing I had to mention. I love that they basically got the community in on it. They encouraged modding. That's something I just haven't seen otherwise. So I had to mention that, but a B tier is all I could give this. So for any people who are angry, I hope you can understand why. And yeah, that's just all I can say on it. Episode 12, Saints Row the Third. Now, before we move further, on the podcast I called it Saints Row 3. So it is mistitled, but for one reason. The very next episode I posted was Saints Row 4. Also, I know there was Titanfall 2 Part 2 between them, but the next game that I hadn't spoken about was Saints Row 4. And when you look at it and you see two titles, Saints Row the Third and Saints Row 4, it looks a bit odd, so I called it Saints Row 3, just so it matched up, if that makes sense. So, just had to quickly address that. The very first thing that I always loved about this game was the humor. It was very well done for it. The combat, fun. The characters I very much enjoyed as well. The customization for your character I also very much enjoyed. For its time, I don't think there was that much customization option for many other games, if that makes sense. So I did like that, but I don't feel like when I looked at the original comparisons, Saints Row the Third was remastered as well, and when I looked at the comparisons, I didn't notice much as well. And when you look at a remaster, you expect more from it. This one I felt didn't have enough. I actually just had to think about it. I was playing it on the Xbox 360, so it wouldn't have been the remastered version. So ignore everything I just said. But on the tier list that I posted, I actually put it at D rank or C rank. Sorry, I'm getting mixed up quite a bit there. I forget that we have an S tier there. I put it at C rank, but looking back on it, I feel like it should have been B tier because I also have some good memories for this. So I think I had a bit of a tough time with it. And I had to decide whether I put it in C tier or B tier, and I think what became the deciding factor was for the next one, which was Saints Row 4. So I'll basically talk about two of them at once, and I think the reason I had to put it a little bit lower was comparing the two. You know, they give the similar vibe, there's similar gameplay in terms of like gun combat, what have you. But I had to make the distinction for one of the biggest reasons. So, Saints Row the Third had to be a C tier just so I could, you know, put Saints Row 4 that little bit higher because of one thing. Saints Row 4 has superpowers in it. Now, your boy loves superheroes and superpowers. Growing up, especially, the thought of having superpowers was always something incredible to me. You know, I grew up with disabilities, so I was at a disadvantage to other people like me. Other people that I knew, other people I was around. So then having the thought of superpowers was like me imagining what it would be to no longer be the one that's less than others, like has less ability than others, and what it would be like to have more ability than others, you know? So superpowers in general have always had a place for me from when I was really young, and having some in it was such a good feeling, and it made the combat so fun. So I had to be able to put it just that little bit higher. As well as that, having the alien invasion and the explanation that the reason it has these superpowers is because it's all in a simulation. Everything's a simulation. The conspiracy theory, but that actually was the story, you know? I had to be able to put that just above, and I placed it in B tier. Because I would like to see it, you know, remastered. That would put it up just that little bit more, but alone it is a really fun game, one that I can definitely see myself playing. There were a few bugs here or there which also affected it. I had once or twice my game shut down on me. That does take away from it, because when it's current update and you still have it occasionally shut down on you, kinda sucks, you know? But B tier, for sure. Next was UFC 3. This was also something very different because I had never, for a second, wanted to play UFC. It just didn't feel like my thing. But then your boy Blaze, he encouraged me to try something new, which this is one of the first things I remembered. I thought, stuff it, I'll do it just to put myself outside my comfort zone. And we went to watch Basic Combat. Like, we went to watch it live, which... It was fun. Like that was so much more fun than I thought. The atmosphere was brilliant. You know, it was something else for me. It's something I never thought I'd enjoy, but I loved being there, and I remember turning to Blaze at one point and saying to him, yeah, I think I got to play the game. Just because of how much I love that atmosphere. The game, I see from two fronts. It was pretty good with the combat itself. You know, the gameplay, it was fun. Grappling, I didn't like that part of the game. That, whether it's because I didn't get it as well, or I couldn't do it, but as well, it wasn't quite the same. That was the only part of the gameplay itself I didn't like. The character customization was pretty good. But what really let me down was it had what it basically called a story mode, or the career mode. But there was bugger all to see. You know, there was not enough in it. You were left wanting. And that's something you never want from a game. So that did let me down. And unfortunately, it dropped it right to C tier. Because there didn't seem enough into it that it would make me want to replay it or, to see more. There wasn't enough there that it really ended up disappointing me based on a story perspective. I realize I've been sort of not saying the tier right away, so I do apologize. I'll try to mark it. Next episode was Grand Theft Auto 5, which I'll say straight away, I dropped to C tier. This was a C tier game for a couple reasons. The game originally, the Xbox 360 version, was how I played it. I did enjoy at the time. This was like a heavy criminality game. Obviously, it's named after a crime, so you can expect it. But we're comparing it to Saints Row, which was a similar sort of vibe. This was so much more heavy on the crimes themselves, and so much more about it. The story I enjoyed quite a lot, and if it were just that, this game would have been a lot higher. But one thing that I very much do not like is re-releasing the game so many times without changing a single thing. The differences between the re-releases were far too minor. It didn't feel that different. And that, to me, sucked. Especially when it has been re-released multiple times. Too many times. It may have looked a little bit better, but not enough to justify calling it a re-release. And, it seems to upscale just from 720p to 1080p. It didn't seem to really get that much better. Between the difference in power between Xbox 360 and Xbox One, there was so much more room for improvement than they really let on, than they really put into it. It just had to drop it down to a C tier. If they had put more work into it and made it even 60 frames per second, because that is, I believe, possible on the Xbox One, could have been done, or at least putting it to 4K, which it can do as well. If it were one or the other, it would have been more worth it, but it didn't feel like it was improved enough to call it an enhanced edition or a remastered edition. It just isn't right. And it annoyed me just how little there was. And then one thing that I can understand, one point of view for the company itself, because they don't really allow modding. I can understand, not allowing big mods online. So, mods like aimbot, that sort of thing. I can understand that. But when you have mods which are purely visual mods, there should have been more allowance for that. But I've heard very bad things about it, that if you have any type of mod, no matter how small, and you go online, well, you are stuffed, aren't you? I would have loved to have seen just a little bit of allowance, even if they themselves didn't massively upgrade the visuals. Allowing their fans to have that opportunity would have made it so much higher for me. But the fact that they didn't change enough between the re-releases, they've re-released it so many times, a lot of people are upset about it. I am too. And it lost so much because of it. I was very disappointed by that. A slightly brighter time, Mario Kart Wii was the very next episode. What a difference there is between Grand Theft Auto 5 and Mario Kart Wii. They cannot be compared in any matter. But this was one I played when I was very young, and my family has been playing this game for years. Looking back on it, I had to place it low, which is... It hurts me a little bit to do it, if I'm being honest. I had to place it in the D tier, because looking back, it can't stack up to now, Now that I've experienced the much newer games in it, and I've seen so many more graphics updates, there's so much of a difference there. So many new vehicles, including the addition now you can glide with your vehicles, you can go underwater. looking back on Mario Kart Wii, it just cannot compare. So it pained me a little bit to do so. And it was very tough between choosing C and D. But I put it in the D in the end. Partly, if I'm being honest, the D tier was pretty blank. I didn't want to have one game alone because that felt a bit like I was singling it out. So I know that sounds stupid, but that was part of it. But there's no way that Mario Kart Wii can compare to now. And I have a lot of good memories with it, but I know that there was quite a few things that would have changed. It's a tough one, but that's what I ended up deciding on. Up next was Manuel Samuel. Now, this one, as I said in probably the original episode, this game is what led to my discovery of both Markiplier and Jacksepticeye. This was when I was very new to YouTube. I saw somebody else playing it, and they only played a very little bit of it, so I couldn't see the rest of the story. And so I wanted to see more. I wasn't going to be able to play it myself, and watching someone else play it was the next best thing. And so I originally found Markiplier doing it, and that's how I first watched his, but he never finished the game either. Jacksepticeye did. And so that was how I did it. So yes, that led to the discovery there. Playing it later, it was fun. I did love the humour behind it so much. That's what I think this did best. And it was a very small project, so I admire it greatly for what it does. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite justify putting it in B tier. And I think part of it is because it is also a fairly short game in the end. It's difficult to make something so grand, so big with such a small budget, such a small group of people. But as I said, C tier was the final decision on it, because I found myself, I couldn't really complete it more than once, and I do take that into account a lot when it comes to games, is can I play it more than once? And this one, I never really finished it the second time. The gameplay could be a bit tedious, so it had a few things about it, but overall I do have a love for the game, but I couldn't compare it to others quite as well. Another Need for Speed game was next. Need for Speed Heat. Now, once again, I did enjoy this game. Any game that I play, I tend to enjoy. I'm the type of guy, if I start playing it, I have to start enjoying it. Otherwise, I don't finish the thing, And even if I don't really like it, often I can trick myself into liking it. Whether it's through pure determination to finish it that I get so into it, I start to pick up the gameplay really well, and therefore I start to like it more, or whatever. I do tend to enjoy them in the end. The controls for this were pretty well done. I started playing it not long after I finished Need for Speed Payback, and the upgrade system I found was done better for this, but the driving didn't feel as good for me. I didn't feel the speed as much as I did, and not having the nitrous, the boost to the speed, that always added a lot, and I didn't feel as much with this one. It also had the same problem that Need for Speed Payback had, which was, instead of making games truly difficult, it decided to screw you over just to call it difficult. I hate that. Genuinely, I hate that. And this did it quite a bit as well. As when I felt the speed of it, it didn't feel quite as good as Need for Speed Payback, and so that dropped it just a little bit further to now C tier. Yeah, it had its merits, but it had its downfalls. So mid tier. Took a while to get here, but another game which is known for its difficulty, Dark Souls 2. Originally, I had between Dark Souls 3 and Dark Souls 2. I had to choose one of the two to play first, and even though the stories are not connected, I wanted to be able to talk about Dark Souls 2 first, as, it was a slightly older game, and I could compare visuals and how the gameplay evolved between the two. So I decided to play that one first, and therefore made an episode on it first. The gameplay felt slow a lot of the time. A little bit too slow. And then, therefore, when I was comparing it to not Dark Souls, but Bloodborne, the difficulty was there, but it felt too slow for me. Having the parrying, I liked that there was an option there, but I could never get the hang of it. Honestly, I couldn't get the hang of it for Dark Souls 3 either, but it was there. So I was mostly a dodge type, and that's where the slower pace really got to me. And being too slow, it dropped it right down to B tier. It could have been A tier, but it was B tier simply because it felt too slow. Next up was Dark Souls 3. This felt a lot faster to me. This was an S tier game all the way. It felt a lot faster for me in terms of just the gameplay. That's what this really is. Both of them had their lore standpoints, which I felt were done quite well, but even the pace of the game it was so much better than Dark Souls 2, which put it right up to S tier. It felt a little bit closer to Bloodborne, which Bloodborne is now, for when it comes to any difficulty game, a game that is just known for being difficult, that I can't help but compare it at least a little bit to Bloodborne, and this felt so much closer to it, being faster, and just feeling nicer. So this made it to S tier. Easy. Loved this game. Stranded Deep. Once again, a big jump between the two games, from Dark Souls 3 to Stranded Deep. Massive differences between the two. Completely different styles of games. Stranded Deep was one... It's a survival game, so you can't expect a lot of story. It's building your own things, lower technology. You don't have all the big stuff. You have a watch which tells you all your stats, your health, your strength, whatever else. It's very simple. I believe this was another indie game. I found I could never get that far into it. I hear there are bosses to verse, but I never made it to a boss simply because by the time I felt I was confident to go and get to one, I couldn't find it, and then I drifted onto other games, so I couldn't experience everything there was for this game, and it was one that just didn't quite stack up. It didn't hit quite as well as others, and that put it in a C tier for me. It's not bad by any means, but it wasn't great by any means, so C tier was the only option. Assassin's Creed Unity. Woo boy. This, as if you've listened to that episode, you will know Blaze loved this game and highly recommended it to me, and I really loved this game. This was a beautiful game. It was the only game I played even close to it in release years. The most recent before that was Assassin's Creed 3 that I played, and then to Unity. So there were only a few years between the two, but there was a difference in console power between the two as well. And boy, how the gameplay changed. It changed a lot, and Assassin's Creed Unity very quickly became one of my favorites too. Became one of the best games I've ever played. I loved it. The story was great. I very much liked the main character. In fact, for you, I believe we mentioned it in the episode, Blaze had named his dog after the main character. That's how much the game impressed him, and it very much held a lot for me as well. S tier all the way. One of the best Assassin's Creed games I think they've ever made. One that I truly loved right from the start. There is nowhere else I could have put it. Very much loved it. And one of my most highly recommended games. Going from an Assassin's Creed game to a racing game, we had Forza Horizon, the original Forza Horizon. I was playing this game before I even got my first personal console. So I remember playing it on the Xbox 360 with my dad some years ago now. He and I, he never really played it. He didn't play much himself, but he enjoyed having my company there, and so I was able to play it basically for him, and he'd have fun teasing me for every time I crashed and telling me how terrible a driver I am and how he's never getting in a car with me when I'm driving. I had a lot of good memories for this game, and it becomes a case that knowing where the series has gone and how much it's improved, it becomes difficult to compare this and put it as high, It's a B tier, which is pretty good. Like, this was a game I quite enjoyed. I always loved the idea of these special events it had, where at one point you're racing against a plane, and that just felt like such a cool thing. And the only other things that really took away from it, I remember, was sometimes you would have a small bush, which should never be able to stop a car going at even 40 kilometers an hour, let alone a car going much, much faster. But you'd crash into it and suddenly you're gone, There were a few things that took away from it, which is what brought it down to B tier. But it holds a place for me, and it still holds its weight as a good game. Up next was Sims 4. We know EA does not have the greatest track record in recent years. They have been... They've been rocky. It's hard to say it in exact ways, but they've made a lot of dumb mistakes, and they've gained a lot of negative attention for basically re-releasing the same games, everything like that. But Sims 4 itself wasn't as bad as pretty much any of the other games they've released, and it was one that I found surprised me, was they were very friendly towards modding community, basically. It was one that you never would have expected from EA, basically saying, yeah, we like mods, we want the community to be able to add their thing to it, and there are mods everywhere just about for it. That impressed me, and it's one I found myself wasting time to. But the fact that it was a bit more simple in gameplay, there wasn't as much to experience, there was no story, no individual characters, it wasn't quite as engaging, but it made up for that in terms of free choice and customization options. So, it had its strength, it had its drawbacks, but it was C tier. It was pretty good, but without the mods and the fact that it's so expensive to get everything could be a bit iffy. But if you were to add the mods in as another feature, it would go up to B tier, but on its own, I would have to put it down at C tier. Undertale is our next one. Oh boy, Undertale has a place in so many hearts. I've also experienced this one through, at this point, 4 different YouTube channels that I watch, and watching the way they played, their commentary on it. It was one I found myself able to watch multiple times from different people, as well as rewatching the series. And as soon as I had the chance to play it, I was giddy. I was so excited to play it. And it still hits the same, whether you've seen it many times before, and when you're playing it your first time, it still hits just as well. A tier. Just behind S tier. It was a toughie, admittedly. It was a bit tough, but I put it in A tier because it definitely has its place. it will always have my heart, but it's difficult to put it in the same leagues as the S tier, so I unfortunately had to demote it just a little bit to A tier, but there is no way in hell it would be any less than A tier for me. Almost done. I will continue on in just a moment. If you're still around at this point, I greatly appreciate having you listening. I know this can seem a bit samey, and unfortunately, I guess the tier list is sometimes a bit more difficult to do in terms of just audio. You know, sometimes it helps to have that visual feedback as well. And yeah, I feel like, you know, it can be a bit samey listening to it, but I hope you're still listening. And if you are, thank you. But without me saying anything else, we'll continue on to the next game, which is Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2. The Plants vs. Zombies series is one I knew from when I was very young. Very, very young. My mum, I think, found it originally, and my whole family was playing it for a time. You know, we'd played it multiple times. We were back when you had your own little garden where you could grow all your plants even. We saw that come in and go through. Had a lot of fun with it. That's an old feature which you don't find many times. That was on the DS version, because I actually still have the old DS cartridge now that I think about that. So the Plants vs. Zombies series had its place. Garden Warfare 2 it had basically the same vibe to it, but it was a third-person shooter. So that was such a cool idea to me. All the characters in it were great. I tended to main Citron. I loved Citron. I also love the Sunflower. That's probably the mascot of Plants vs. Zombies by now, the one we all know best. And yeah, playing as them was great. It had that old feel while completely redesigning it. So, again, it was fun. It was good to see, but I had to put it B tier. Couldn't really put it any higher. You know, it had the same nostalgic feeling, but not quite the same. You know, it's right in that middle zone. You still get the nostalgia, but you can't compare it to the original. It's weird, but B tier for sure. Next up was one of the very first games that I really had more of a negative feeling towards. Outlast 2. This is the first E tier. I did not like this game. It was so simple in the gameplay. It was, you know, you're recording things and you're just escaping. That alone isn't as bad, but I couldn't enjoy it. It was one I did not find myself enjoying at all. The visuals weren't bad. I liked the visuals in terms of it, but the gameplay was too samey. It was a walking simulator, which is something I've been introduced to, a term I didn't know until I played this game. You know, and there's just not enough excitement to it. Not only that, I got stuck on one part of it, and after being stuck there for a while was when I stopped for a minute and I looked back and I thought, I really haven't been enjoying this. And it was then when I realized I didn't want to finish the game. And it was one of the few games that I've spoken about and never finished. It did not hit for me. This was one of the worst games I've played for me. Did not enjoy it. E tier. No bueno. Back to a brighter note, Assassin's Creed Valhalla. The most recent in the series, and a game I loved. I love Vikings. Blaze can comment far more on that. Blaze loves Vikings. He can comment on historical accuracy, and there was quite a bit in it in terms of like looking at their culture and learning about the culture from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. It was good, but then hearing more, because Blaze has done quite a lot of research, as I said, he's very interested in that sort of thing, and then learning of it through him, because It was a talking point. Being able to learn through it was great. So this is S tier all the way, right? The S tier game. For this ranking episode, this was the final S tier game for season 1 of NotSoHardcoreGaming. I like the way that it had a lot of historical accuracy. This was a beautiful game. The gameplay was great. The way the skills were all set up, I enjoyed. There are a few things about it that I didn't really like, and very much S-tier game, very, very well done for it. Cannot put it any less. I would be all sorts of wrong if I put it less. Up next, a different type of difficulty game was Hollow Knight. Now, the art style for Hollow Knight I loved. I really did enjoy the art style. Before moving on, its ranking was B tier. It was right smack dab in the middle for me. I couldn't go as far into this game as I would have liked. I talk about games for a long time. I've been talking about them. I play games a lot. Doesn't mean I'm good at them, and I could never get as far into this as I would have liked. But the difficulty was surely there. I love to take on the 2D aspect of it, the platforming with the difficulty as well. It did work for me, but just the fact that I felt often restricted and being unable to get that far into it, I couldn't appreciate it as much as I would have liked, which is why I had to put it in the B tier, is I couldn't get as much appreciation as is required to put it up higher. Now, the racing game was Forza Motorsport 5. And this is, unfortunately, another E tier. I could never get into this game as much. Especially now, being able to compare it to ones like Forza Horizon, it just doesn't compare at all, because it's just, you go one racetrack, you race it, you go to the next. It felt very restrictive. You didn't get the freedom you got for others. The game, when you're driving really fast, you don't feel the speed in it. And Jeremy Clarkson's voice gets so irritating after a while. I found myself just thinking, oh my god, get to it already. Because you were unable to skip it, it annoyed me. So this had to be an E tier. I couldn't bring myself to put it any higher. Did not enjoy Forza Motorsport 5. The very next game was Halo Combat Evolved. Another game in the Halo series. One I played fairly recently. I played the remastered version because I had access to the Master Chief Collection, so obviously the visuals are, and I will say it's one of the remasters that I've played that you can notice a big difference between the visuals. It was a true remaster. The gameplay, it was definitely Halo. Obviously, I had Halo 4, and actually I have played Halo 5, although I have not spoken about Halo 5 on the podcast yet. I would like to replay it from the Master Chief Collection before I do talk about it on the podcast. But Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary Edition, the full name. As I said, it was definitely Halo. I very much got the vibe. I enjoyed the combat, but I found sometimes the difficulty was grueling, and I was playing on a low difficulty. Navigation around certain things was difficult sometimes. It didn't place waypoints very much, so I found I'd be backtracking and it would take me a while to find the right place to go. And for those reasons, it was a C tier game. If the navigation had been a bit easier, if it had have shown me where to go more frequently, because sometimes it showed you where you needed to go beautifully, other times not at all. If it had been more consistent on that front, it would have been a lot higher, and if it had have had a bit more guidance, because for a few parts of it, I would think to myself, okay, it's about getting where I need to go. I can't kill all of these. For a long time, I didn't even know there was a shotgun, for example, as well. But then I would find out ages too late, you need to not only get there, but you have to kill a certain amount of them. And if it had have had more emphasis on that, and I had have told you a bit more, then I would have understood a lot better, and it would have put it higher. But as I said, it had to be a C tier for Halo Combat Evolved. Games were on an episode where I spoke about 2 different games in one episode. These were very small games, which were It Lurks Below and Don't Starve. So I'll start with It Lurks Below. This was a D tier game for me. It, in some vibes, reminded me of Minecraft by, the sort of pixely thing, but it wasn't a first-person game. It was actually a side-scroller, which, I guess for a lot of people that recognize it more as being similar to Terraria, although I have not played Terraria. It's an alright game to play for a little bit, but I couldn't play it for long periods of time, which ended up putting it in a D tier. It didn't hit for me. I never really made it through many bosses. It just didn't hit for me personally, so I had to put it in D tier. The other game was Don't Starve. See, I loved the art style for this, but it was the gameplay just, it seemed far too difficult for me. Even when I made it as easy as I could do it, it was still almost impossible for me to survive for any amount of time. I could never really get far into the crafting, and I would die way too many times. And that made it an E tier for me. This was one that it seemed a little bit too extreme, that I could never get that far into it, and therefore I couldn't really appreciate it, because I just couldn't see very much into it. It was just unfortunate. Truly unfortunate. Now we're almost towards the end. We have just a few games left to talk about, and the next one is Assassin's Creed 2, which was, I think, the very first Assassin's Creed game I ever played. And this was very early on in my playtime, and it's one that I had a lot of memories for. And it would have had such a great place, except, and before I do say it, I better say the tier, shouldn't I? Because I've been leaving that for too long. This is a B tier game for me. For one reason, because it would have been a lot higher. When I see a game that says a remaster, and it doesn't look like it doesn't remaster it enough, that takes away from it for me. It makes the game worse, because it's like they're saying, oh yeah, this is a remaster, this is going to look so much better, but it doesn't really. It only looks a little bit better. It didn't feel like a true remaster. Again, similarly to what it was for GTA 5, it had been a higher frame rate, or it just had a truly remastered it, this would have ended up 80. The gameplay was a bit clunky, I found, which if it were a little bit more smooth, it would have been S tier. If it were smoother and the remaster felt more like a remaster, But those two things combined had to drop it to a B tier, which is a bit of a shame, because as I said, I did love this game. It was my first experience with the series, and it's a nostalgic thing for me, but it's just not as good as you want to remember it. You know how when you look back in the day and through the nostalgia filter, you remember it so much better, but then when you play it again, you think it's not as good as I remembered it. That is exactly what it was for me. Predator Hunting Ground was the second last episode out so far. This was a very high-placed one for me. I have never had great experience with online multiplayer games, because I've never had very great internet, but this has been one of the smoothest multiplayer experiences I've ever had. It connects very easily compared to any other game I've played online. The gameplay is smooth. It feels good to play. I had very little lag issues even. And this is a small download too, which makes it even more impressive that it looks good and it feels good despite being such a small download. A tier all the way. Just below S tier because I never really got to fully enjoy the Predator game, like that part of the gameplay. So I only speak from a Fireteam perspective. The weapons let me down a little bit. There didn't seem like enough weapons and enough weapon customization for me to fully enjoy it. For me to really be impressed by it, which puts it just a hair below S tier. But a truly great game. I would never put it any less than A tier. It's sort of like A+. It's right smack dab in the middle. By far the best multiplayer game I've played so far. Now that brings us to the most recent episode before today's episode. The most recent. Which is a double. With Super Hot and Bridge Constructor Portal. Both of these games have their merits. Super Hot, I have always loved the idea for. I said it in the original, I found a game which had the exact same concept, bullets slow down and you're able to dodge them and move faster, and it's about getting your enemies before they get you. You can dodge bullets easily, all of that. The game I had found was quite similar. I won't go into that because that's in last episode. But Super Hot, I very much enjoyed because the gameplay was smooth. There was so much more than I expected. And when it comes to the visuals, they just kind of work. This is an A tier game. It is great. If there were a little bit more put into the textures and it were a little bit smoother, it would be S tier. But, it works for what it is, which makes it A tier. This is a damn good game. And finally, the last game for today's tier list is Bridge Constructor Portal. A puzzle game. I love me a puzzle game. Your boy's dumb, so he likes to have a puzzle game to get his brain working. And it's a good one to do that while still having that same humor, that same Portal feel. This is another A tier game. As I said, you get the Portal feel. You've got GLaDOS like that. You get the same humor of Corporation Bad, basically. That sort of thing. I loved the humor behind it. I loved the Portal feel in general. But I've played Portal 2. Don't know why I haven't spoken about it yet. I'll get on that. And yeah, it was that while being a puzzle game. And it just blended beautifully. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. A tier. And that's everything. This last year has been pretty damn good, and I'm really happy that it's now been a year. There's a lot to look back on. I hope today's episode hasn't been too long for you, but I had to talk about every episode. That's just what felt right. Thank you very much for joining, and I'll have a special guest for you in just a moment. There he is! Blaze. I had to have him on. He's my most regular guest. Great friend of mine and very close for the channel. Blaze, thank you for coming on today.
I'm a little scared. This couch looks a little like casting. Thank you for having me on. It's a long way down to sit. Very low couch, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a little bit, but I'm a short fucker, so I can do it.
Hope we're all having a good day.
Yeah, it's the anniversary episode. There's no way in heck I couldn't try and get him on. So, do you have any comments about any of our games? Like, what are highlights for you? I want to hear.
Alright, I'm going to try and zoom out of this picture that we've got up here, right? So, I agree with most of it. I mean, there are some games, like I love Need for Speed Heat, so I'd probably move that over to like demigod tier.
18, nice. Okay.
Yeah, so if everyone looks at this on Facebook, he's got it on his Facebook. I helped him set this up, so if you have a look on Facebook, you can see all listings, and he's got really cool little nicknames for the. And you know, so like
I was perfectly transparent that you came up with the nicknames.
Oh, even better. I'll take credit for that.
He made the template for it. I added all the pictures and ranked them. So he's done a lot of work for this.
And like I'd probably, I can't. Like, some of these games I haven't played, like Subnautica, Dark Souls 3, Undertale, some of the other littler games. But the big ones, God of War, Bloodborne, all the Assassin's Creed, Skyrim. Like, I'd move Skyrim over to S tier, only because of how much you can actually do in Skyrim.
Okay, yeah, that does make sense.
And it doesn't look the best, but for its age, like, they put a lot of effort into the vast world, so that I would move Skyrim over to S tier.
I said for me, it's sort of, because it was released as sort of a remaster and there wasn't enough difference, that's what
it didn't really
disappointed me.
It didn't look different at all.
Yeah.
So I had both PS3 and PS4 versions looked the same.
Yeah, exactly. And as I said, for me, like, as the viewer will know, when I was looking at it, I had to look at it as the game itself. If you were to say the game with mods, S tier.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to look at the game without mods because anytime you introduce mods, people will experience it differently.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So I'd put the original Skyrim in S tier, and I'd put the remaster in C tier, only because the remaster was terrible. It didn't look any different.
Yeah.
But the rest I agree with. Outlast 2. Outlast 1 was really good. I don't know if you played Outlast 1. I
haven't been able to at this moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, Outlast 1 I really enjoyed. So, but I agree with Outlast 2. Outlast 2 was terrible. It just wasn't scary. Religious wars and whatnot just aren't. You can't. It was gory.
Plus, as I said, like in the original, it seemed like they were basically saying, say the most screwed up thing you can, just for shock factor.
100%.
And shock factor does not add a lot.
No. But like things like Halo, I haven't played Halo. I'm not an Xbox man, but like most of it, all of it, other than those ones I mentioned, on the money. I love it.
The other ones I thought I'd check with you as you introduced. Predator Hunting Ground.
Yeah, I'd leave that in A tier. Yeah.
Love Saints Row. You were a Saints Row bloke.
Yeah, but I still would leave it in C tier, because as much as I love Saints Row the 3rd didn't do much for me. If you'd played Saints Row 2, that would be an S tier for me, because that was a blood great game, And real sad, has a real brutal but sadness, to it. Like, it was.
Yeah.
So I got to get that for you. I got to give you that to play, because that's bloody awesome.
Is it PS4?
No, it's PS3.
Okay. Well, hopefully I'll be able to talk about that. UFC 3, I wanted your opinion on as well.
Yeah, I'd leave that in C tier. Mainly because it looks good, plays good, feels good, but he's got the door open. Those noises are scaring me. It looks good, feels good, plays good, but it was very limited in what you could do.
Yeah.
If the storyline was a bit more in depth, like, if you give your character personality, like, it just had no personality to it. It was do this fight, do that fight, do this fight, do that fight. You're the champion now. Defend your title. Move up a weight class. Defend your title. Yeah. It was boring.
Yeah, that's exactly how I was looking at it. So I wanted to finish this with, even though we've done the tier list, I wanted to finish this by saying my top 3 favourite games. And I'd like you to do the same if you can.
Yep.
I wanted to start probably in my top 3, and I won't rank this with best, like, second and third. But the top 3 would have to be Bloodborne, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and God of War 4 are my top 3 favourite games on the entire list.
I don't see For Honor on here. Did you not review For Honor?
Did I?
No, you did. I thought you did. Maybe you didn't.
No, I might have, but I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, so my top 3, Bloodborne is number 1. Bloodborne will always be number 1.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
It's a bit tough, isn't it?
It's very tough.
Yeah, as that's sort of like, I can't rank them from first, second, and third. I have to rank in just top 3.
So Bloodborne number 1, Crisis 3 number 2. You haven't played Crisis, but good game.
I did mean for the tier list.
But
okay,
for the tier list,
yes.
Okay, Bloodborne number 1. God of War number 2, because that was pretty good. Actually, no, Assassin's Creed Valhalla number 2, and then Assassin's Creed Unity number 3.
Okay, so I'm guessing God of War.
God of War will be number 4.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if we're going all out, like it'd be Bloodborne, Crisis 3, and then Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Okay, nice. Yeah, I'll definitely be able to play more. I will try and play Crisis in this upcoming year in Season 2. And that's it for the first anniversary special and Season 1 of Not So Hardcore Gaming. Thank you once again.
It's been a pleasure coming on. I hope to join in with Season 2.
I would love that. And thank you for being here throughout.
No, that's cool. You know, obviously most of the time our schedules don't match, but, you know, I like to get on the air sometimes.
Yeah, we do it when we can.
Yeah, and I will eventually jump onto your other podcast as well. If you haven't checked it out, check it out. It's mint. I love it. It's a good soup from me.
It is now one I take even more pride in watching it with, you know, I've got my edit in there. It started off at a nice quality. I'd love to see you there. It's one I'm very happy to do. And, of course, there will be a Season 2 for Not So Hardcore Gaming. And for sure, I will see you, the listener, there. And I will definitely see you there, Blaze.
Of course you will.
Thank you for listening, everyone. And I will see you next time. Have a good one.